How does it feel when things get so overwhelming, when we can't get into the mode of things and that there is just so much to do and it feels like a mountain to climb? Burnout is on the rise, and with that comes so many challenges. Studies show that people are more stressed than ever, and with that in mind, how do we as individuals, employers, family members deal with this? In my own journey, I have felt times when I was stressed. I love the buzz of doing multiple things, but sometimes things can get too much. I remember when I was working in London, at times I left the office at 11 p.m. to then be at work for 8 a.m. the next day. This isn't sustainable, but it still happens. The question is, how can we be productive? How can we deliver, yet at the same time look after ourselves? What do companies need to do to move the conversation and implement that change? Because in the end, this will impact profit and productivity. My guest today is passionate about well-being in work and in her personal life. Alex Jean-Poix, a passionate startup and social impact evangelist. She boasts over 10 years of diverse experience gained at the United Nations and in the private sector. Following her tenure at UNICEF, she transitioned to the UAE, dedicating the last 5 years to fostering ecosystems by linking fledgling startups with essential networks and resources. Her most recent encounter with burnout inspired her to launch her own wellness and productivity podcast and summit, aiming to equip individuals and businesses with practical strategies to enhance wellness as a key to productivity. Additionally, she's poised to make history this fall with the UAE's first women-owned Remax franchise. How amazing is that? Such vast experience and such impact that you've had on the world, Alex. It's so great to have you here today.
Thank you so much for having me, Monica. It's a pleasure.
So this topic of well-being is something you're very passionate about. Tell us more about what it means to you.
For me, well-being is about balance. It's about being being so well that everything else that you touch, that it reflects on everything else that you touch. So well-being starts with yourself. It's not a luxury. It's not selfish. It's a necessity. So it's that right balance of yourself and then pouring into everything else. But your glass has to be full first.
Powerful. So this whole concept of the glass being full, so many of us in society, we do it the other way around. Mm-hmm. We have this glass that's empty, yet we're still trying to help others.
Exactly.
So how do we fill our glass?
I think it starts with self-awareness. You have to know who you are, what works for you and what doesn't. And then, because especially as women, sometimes we are nurturing to our own detriment. We think that we have to take care of everything and everybody else, even if it means that we don't sleep or we don't eat. So I think it's really important to know who you are and what works for you. For example, for me, my wellness, as I was just telling you before, water makes me happy. So it's just the little things. Once you know if it's the gym or if it's meditation, understand what works for you. And once you focus on those things, then that's what fills your glass. And once your glass is full, then you'll be able to pour into other things. So I think it starts with self-awareness, definitely.
Yeah, that's so true. Like with me, I have like a morning routine and a morning ritual. And if I ever break out of that, I can feel the adverse effects of that for me. So knowing what you need and following that through becomes really important for our own well-being. And then we have the energy, then we have the ability to help ourselves and others.
Definitely.
Wow, amazing. So you created the Wellness and Productivity Summit in the UAE. What was the mission behind this and what was the intention of it in terms of its impact?
The intention for me was after I experienced burnout, last year after my grandmother passed away, it was the biggest shock that I had to deal with. And I realized how it affected my body, my mind, and my ability to do everything else. And I think I've always known that wellness, my health affected my ability to work and just show up in any other capacity. But it wasn't until that happened that I realized that, okay, you can't be productive unless you're well. As I was telling you before, it's not optional, it's necessary. So for me, with the Wellness and Productivity Summit, is just raising awareness, just reminding people that you can't do well without being well, and just making sure that individuals and companies have the right tools at their disposal to prioritize wellness. And especially with companies, I think as individuals, sometimes we'll realize that, oh, wellness is important, but for corporations, it's a lot more difficult for them. They might see it as a waste of money, but a healthy employee is a productive employee, and they have everything to gain from investing in employee well-being.
Thanks for that, and sorry about the loss of your grandma.
Thank you.
You said you realized that you had to make some changes.
Absolutely.
So what did you do to help yourself?
Oh, well, at first I made the same mistakes that I always made. I tried to pour myself into work and just kept myself busy. And I hosted the summit 2 or 3 months after she passed, just trying to work and just doing everything, just to keep going and keeping myself busy. But then it got to a point where my mind and my body just broke down, and I just had to step away from everything and took that time off. So even when as I was putting the summit together, I was doing the opposite of what I knew I needed to do. So I think it's one thing to know about the concept, but it's another to really practice it, and also giving ourselves grace. Because I feel like we might at times be tempted to see the need for rest as a weakness, when we all need it. Even machines need rest. So as humans, we need to give ourselves grace, give ourselves time to recover when you need to.
So we see it in the animal kingdom as well. When animals aren't well, they'll rest, they'll take a break. Our dog used to go in the garden and eat grass because that's what he knew he needed to feel better. So as human beings, we need the same thing. We need to rest. We need to almost go into a place where we can rejuvenate.
Absolutely.
And before we went on air today, you talked about the fact that burnout isn't an event. It's not that Monica wakes up or Alex wakes up one day and she says, I have burnout. It's something quite different. Can you explain that in more detail to us?
Absolutely. So burnout is not something that, as I was saying, that you just wake up with. It's a process. It accumulates every time. Today, it's, skipping lunch. Tomorrow, it's taking work home. The next day is staying in the office until 11, as you were saying, and then showing up at 8 o'clock. It's just all the little ways in which we neglect ourselves that catch up with us, because the body and the mind, they need to rest, they need to recover, they need to replenish them. We can't expect constant output without replenishment. So burnout is, it accumulates, and we have to get into the habit of replenishing ourselves constantly to avoid it, because it doesn't happen overnight, and we can cure it overnight either. So it's just the little thing, being aware, being intentional about the little decisions that you make on a daily basis. For example, for me, my morning routine is non-negotiable. My walk, my meditation, I don't check my phone until I have had time for me. And I think it looks differently for everybody. Wellness is not, a one-size-fits-all. My wellness looks differently from yours, but as long as you identify what works for you and do it, I think that's the important thing.
Powerful. So it's about us understanding our individual needs and doing those things. So as a person, we can do those things. How do we change the narrative within organizations for them to really support their staff? Because organizations have deadlines, they have commitments to customers or projects they need to deliver. So what can they do to support their employees?
Well, who's going to deliver on those projects? It's people, right? So your organization is as healthy as your people are. And there's a study that said that in the US alone, disengaged employees cost businesses about $500 million in lost productivity. So I think businesses need to understand that it's an investment like everything else. It affects their bottom line. Because, for example, you and I now, we're both recovering from a call and we have those beautiful voices. But let's say, for example, that an organization is so focused on deadlines and deliverables that somebody is sick, but they don't feel like they have the luxury of staying home and recovering. So they go to work, spread whatever they have to everybody else. You understand? So how does that make the organization better? I think the conversation needs to shift. They need to understand that it's something that affects their bottom line, and they can take certain measures and I guess measure the output, but also create an environment where employees feel safe, where somebody feels that it's okay to take your lunch. It's not a luxury. You come to work, you need a break. It's perfectly fine. It doesn't mean that you're lazy. You're not going to be penalized for taking a day off when you need to. I think the companies need to create that safe environment where people can feel that they're not going to be penalized just for being human. Mm-hmm. And once people feel that they're appreciated, that they're cared for, then you'll see that output, increase.
The psychological safety, that's what you've touched upon. And, we want to go to work and we want to feel safe.
Yes.
We want to be able to express something to our managers. And I feel that it starts from the top. If the leadership sets the right tone and, almost saying to people that it's okay if you're not feeling well, don't come to work. Mm-hmm. Or if you're feeling okay but can't come to the office but can work from home, it's like providing that flexibility, because the minute an employee feels that their employer cares for them, then they will do the work even if they have a bit of a cold, but they do it from the luxury of their home rather than traveling an hour to get to the office. So it can be small wins like that as well, couldn't it?
Absolutely. It's just the little things that make people feel cared for, make people feel seen. And I think, as you were saying, it starts from the top. So management has to set that example as well. So if you want to create a healthy culture, you also have to, at times as a leader, know when to shut everything down and get out of the office, because they will follow your lead. Because sometimes the employee will feel guilty, that they have to leave when, the manager's still there. So you have to set that right example, just to let people know that, okay, I am as human as you are. I need to replenish my batteries and I'm leaving. It's safe for everybody else to do the same.
Yeah. So true. Powerful. Tell us more about you and your life. What makes you so passionate about the work that you've done? You've worked for the UN, you've worked for UNICEF, this is something in there about giving and service. So where has that come from?
I was born and raised in Haiti, which is, I guess, a beautiful country, but with its own share of turmoil. And I moved to the US when I was still quite young, and I went to school there. And after that, I worked at the UN. It was my first job after college. It was my very first experience. But I think for me, impact, even before the UN, it comes from being a firstborn and losing my parents at a very young age, and having to be there for my sister, having to, I guess, grow up a bit faster than everybody else. And I think I always had that, and we were raised in a very religious family. So I saw my grandmother was my biggest example. So she would go pray with different people. She would go to prisons, go to different things. She had, she was part of several church groups, and for holidays we used to feed the poor. So it's something that I grew up seeing in my own family. And later on, joining the UN as my first job, it was just like, you're that bright-eyed kid, you want to change the world and you're ready to make a difference. And but then you started to realize that the world doesn't want to change as quickly as you would want it to, and getting frustrated with the red tape. Like, it's so obvious. Why can't we do this? Why can't we do that? So I started, the little frustrations that I started experiencing at the UN is what kind of turned me towards social impact and towards social enterprise, I would say, because when you look at those big organizations, they all have a role to play. But what I really love about social enterprise is that entrepreneurs, we just have that sense of urgency, that sense of ownership, where we don't have time to wait for you to send an email to that person and then we don't have time for that. It's personal. We need to do it, and we need to do it now. So that's how I fell in love with social enterprise, and it's been, and I fell in love with it every single day.
Are there any elements of social enterprise that you have more of an affinity to or excites you?
I think, as I was saying, is the urgency and ownership for me, and the fact that you don't, to an extent, I feel like you're okay with not being needed at some point. You feel like when you okay with doing your job so well that they'll get to a point where they don't need you. And I think that's the biggest difference between real social impact, social enterprise, and those big organizations, is that you almost feel like there's always a cycle to be perpetuated, whereas with social enterprise, we want to solve the problem once and for all.
What's your role when you work with these passionate enterprises who really want to make that mark in that rapid way, as you described in my own words? How are you working with them?
Yeah, I'm all about strategy and process improvement. So because I have ADHD, it's a blessing in disguise. So you're able to see certain things under pressure that people might not necessarily recognize. And sometimes even when you are so close to a situation, you always need a different pair of eyes to kind of come and look at it. So it's mostly strategy and process improvement for me. So I've done a lot of consulting with early stage startup, helping them set things up. So that's something I'm very passionate about.
Well, that's wonderful. Like, it's such a beautiful thing to do and to have that impact on the world as well.
And I've worked, one of the projects that I was really passionate about was one linking Haitian artists and artisans to international markets. Because one of the things that happened in Haiti, because of all the turmoil, is that we used to depend a lot on tourism. And those artists and artisans, that's how they used to sell their goods. It was when the tourists came and, they just had access. But then as things started getting worse and worse, fewer tourists went to Haiti. So you had people who were still as bright, but just didn't have an outlet. And it was just creating that outlet for them and doing, sorry, my mind is going blank. And we did art exhibits for them, connected them to different stores in the US and elsewhere. And it was so beautiful to see, because for me, I don't like the notion of charity. I prefer opportunity. So one of those artists who impacted me the most was someone who he had polio, I believe, when he was a child and became handicapped. But that man paints so beautifully, and he has paintings that he does on crutches. So for me, that person doesn't need a handout. Just respect what he has to offer, give them the right opportunity, and there we go. So that was one of the projects that really, to this day, remains near and dear to, very, very close to my heart.
Oh, that's so beautiful. And I love this opportunity over charity.
Absolutely.
That's such a powerful statement that you've made. So thank you for that. You touched upon ADHD. If it's okay with you, it'll be really useful for our listeners to understand more about that, especially when it comes to adults and women as well. So what's the journey around you finding that out about yourself?
That's the last thing that I or anybody else would have expected, because I am an introvert. I'm very shy, very quiet. My niece has ADHD and she bounces off every wall. She can't sit still. So that's not something that I ever thought I had until very recently. And once I got the diagnosis, then everything else started to make sense, because there's always that stigma with ADHD. You expect someone to be unable to sit still, and you expect that hyperactivity, but that's not all that there is to it. Some people are hyperactive, but others are very quiet. It's the way your brain is wired, is that constant search for dopamine. It's the forgetfulness. It's the executive paralysis. There's so many other components to it, and I think especially for women, it's a lot harder for girls to be diagnosed with it, because we don't express ourselves like boys do. And I think it's really important to get rid of all of those stigmas and just kind of look at individuals for who they are.
So say if there's someone listening in today, they're based wherever they are in the world, and some of the things that you've said there, it resonates with them around ADHD. What steps can they start to take to understand more about themselves and maybe even get some support?
I would say start by doing research, and it's very important in that process to be compassionate towards yourself. ADHD or any other mental disorder or mental health condition doesn't mean that you are any less than anybody else. It just means that your brain is wired differently, that you respond to different stimuli, and that you may need a different approach. For example, for me, in terms of productivity, for the longest, I was trying to do the toughest thing first. That would never work for somebody with ADHD, because we have interest-wired brains, so we need dopamine. If I am not interested, I have to force myself to do it. And by starting with the thing that I'm least interested in, that's the best way for me to freeze. So once you understand that, then you plan and work around it. So I would say start by doing your own research, being compassionate with yourself, and then, if possible, talk to a medical professional and, take it from there. But it's really, really important to give yourself grace. Don't beat yourself up, because ADHD sometimes comes with other frustrating conditions, because sometimes you'll get really, you can even be depressed because there's underachievement, there's the lack of productivity, they're struggling with, as I was saying again, executive paralysis. So really, really give yourself grace. I mean, that's been a really important part of the process. Give yourself grace.
And grace is a word you've used a number of times, so it sounds like it's really important. And then there's something beautiful in the word grace, because it's so gentle and it's so compassionate.
Yes. That's something that I'm learning because, as somebody who's passionate about social impact and a woman who's very nurturing, who's had to be kind to everybody else, sometimes I forget to be kind to myself. So that's something that I have to remind myself of on a daily basis. Compassion and all of those things start with yourself. And I think one of the factors that contributed to my burnout was trying to fix everything and everybody else without fixing myself, is organizing that summit without taking time to grieve. Yeah.
And sometimes we throw ourselves into our work thinking that that would help.
Exactly.
And all we're doing is suppressing those emotions so they go in deeper, and then one day suddenly rear their ugly heads in some other...
When we least expect it, right?
Exactly.
When we don't have time for it. I remember reading years ago that grief is a debt that we will pay no matter what. So you think you can sweep it under the rug? Doesn't work like that. Take time for it, deal with it, and it will run its course.
Amazing. What do you think needs to be done around the well-being agenda within today's world? For example, is it weekly yoga sessions, or is it you being a strategy person? Is it looking at it more holistically across the future of an organization with longevity?
I think it's not just, there's no panacea. It's not just one thing that's going to solve wellness, but I think it starts with individuals taking responsibility for their own well-being, because you can't wait for an organization to have a nice break room or whatever it is, or to give you permission to be well. Nobody's going to give you permission to be well. Take responsibility for it. So it starts with every single individual. So if every single person, it doesn't have to be a 2-hour morning routine, but let's say that every single person takes the time, maybe even in the morning, just to be mindful for 5-10 minutes. Then you start your day in a better place. Then you go and interact with everybody else from that better place, right? So you imagine if more of us did that, the effect that we can have on each other. So I think the conversation starts and almost ends with the individual, because the corporations are a group of individuals, right? So work on yourself, and then it will, I guess, trigger everything else.
And also, it's like the change, if we make the change within ourselves and our behaviors change and our actions change, and like you said, it has that filtering or almost domino effect. Definitely. As well. Wow, that's amazing. What are your plans for future summits around well-being? Where do you want it to go?
If I had my way, I would see the summit, of course, here in the UAE, which has been my home for the last 5 years. But I want to take it back to New York as well, because I lived there for, that was my home for almost 20 years. And of course, I would like to see it happen in the Caribbean as well, because that's where my roots are from. So for me, I would love to see the summit as a gathering where people can share and grow in their wellness journey. So I would love to see it go global, and I want to see more governments and corporations and individuals working together to make it happen. Because yes, of course, the main responsibility is with the individuals, but everybody else also has a role to play. So when we all come together, then we have healthier individuals, which in turn, gives you healthier businesses and healthier societies as a whole.
Amazing. And so, as you know, You Got This podcast is all about stories of overcoming, and a lot of it is driven by emotional intelligence. So, what does emotional intelligence mean to you?
It's the wisdom that comes from things that you might have reacted to differently in the past. So it's the ability for me to observe your own emotions as opposed to just reacting to them. And again, just like health and wellness, to me, that's still a journey. I can't tell you that I'm absolutely, I feel like my EQ is so high today. No, you don't know what's going to test you tomorrow, So it's just that process of being able to observe your thoughts, recognize certain patterns, and, just adapt and gain wisdom from the whole process. So to me, that would be emotional intelligence.
Beautiful. And if there's someone out there who's struggling or they're going through their own challenge, what would you want to say to them?
Don't give up. Just keep showing up and understand that life is cyclical. You need the downs in order to really appreciate the ups. So look for the lessons, because there's always a lesson, there's always an opportunity. So when things are not necessarily going your way, look for the lesson there, allow yourself to feel what needs to be felt, learn from it, grow from it, and then on to the next step.
Beautiful. So, Alex, how do people get in touch with you? How can they find out more and have that coffee conversation to see where it goes next?
People can reach out to me on LinkedIn, and also the Wellness and Productivity podcast, which is just getting started. So, yeah.
Awesome. It was a huge pleasure to have you here today. And for me, perspectives are really powerful, and the experiences you bring and the impact you've had on society is truly inspiring. So thanks for being here today, and thanks for joining us on the You Got This podcast.
Absolutely, Monica. Thank you so much for holding this space, and you're having an amazing impact as well. And it's a pleasure and an honor to be able to contribute.
Thank you.
Thank you.